Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Remnant Mentality Ministries Youth Service this Sunday. How's everyone doing? Hope you all got a good night's rest and you're ready to get started today into Genesis and then finish out the rest of your day. So my name is Marie Rogers, and so thankful to be here today on another Sunday, the first Sunday of a new month of April. And thank you all for joining in this morning for this lesson as well. Look, if we can always be found on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. If you have been on YouTube and you haven't subscribed yet, we do ask that you go on over, hit that subscribe key, hit the bell that'll alert you anytime that anyone goes live onto Remnant Mentality Ministries. If you're on Facebook, if you haven't been on YouTube, go on over there and just hit subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. Probably the only thing nowadays that's not going to cost you anything extra. So with everything that's going on. So just do that for us. Give us, a thumbs up if you're enjoying what you hear. If it's resonating with you, leave us a comment. Feel free, leave us a comment. But we definitely would encourage you to share the message with friend, family, coworker, classmate. Just hit that share or give them the address. Remnant Mentality Ministry. Something to go on YouTube. And just get it out there for us, please. You'll greatly help us in your support in the ministry that way as well. Okay, so for today, like I said, we are going to cover Genesis chapter 25. And yes, last week we talked about Genesis 24. And just a brief summary on that. We learned that, obviously Abraham was getting older. He had been blessed, right? The Lord had abundantly blessed him. He kept his promises to him. The only thing Abraham wanted, though, his wife had passed. And the only thing Abraham wanted now was to see their son Isaac married. The one thing, though, is he didn't want Isaac to marry a woman, a Canaanite, which is where they were at in Canaan. So he wanted a wife from his hometown, his homeland where his family was from, but he knew he couldn't go back. He didn't want Isaac to go back because he had made a promise with God that when they got there, that's where they were going to be. So he had one of his chief servants go back to his homeland after. He wanted his chief servant to do that. He wanted him to take an oath, though, that if anything happened, that he would not have Isaac marry a Canaanite woman. The servant was a little shaky at first because he's like, okay, you want me to go back there? What if she doesn't come here? So after Abraham assured him that, hey, listen, if you go there, you find a woman and she doesn't want to come back, then you're not held to the oath. The servant goes there. He gets some camels and he gets some goods, some gifts to take with him. He goes there, he goes to the well, he prays to God. There's a lady that comes, a young lady by the name of Rebecca. She comes over to the well and, he has a couple of different questions that he asks and she answers them the way, he asked God. If she answers a certain way, then that would be her. And after a while, he finally gives her a ring and he gives her 2 bracelets. And she runs back to her home and she gets in and her mother's there, the brother's there, and they see her with the bracelets and the ring. And before she can even say anything, she's trying to tell him, she didn't tell him who gave it to him, but she's trying to tell him what happened. Laban is her brother. Laban runs out to the well, meets the servant, and basically tells the servant, to come on up and that they have room for him. Long story short, the servant ended up saying Rebecca ended up going back to meet Isaac. She agreed to go back. And so they got married once Rebecca got back. So that kind of sealed it for Abraham because that was what he wanted, someone from back home, probably someone with the same values as he did as well. So that kind of closes out chapter 24 and gets us ready for chapter 25 to find out what happens now that Isaac is married, Abraham's getting older. What's actually going to take place? That's what we're going to learn today. All right, so before we do, let's go ahead and pray. Father God, I thank you for today. I thank you, Lord, for everything that you're doing in our lives, the mighty moves, Lord. Lord, I just ask that you just give us wisdom, give us guidance, and give us patience, Lord, when we come to you and we ask you a question, and Lord, when you give us an answer, let us take that answer as it is, and let's not pick it apart and make it something that it isn't. Let's not try to go on our own and decipher it, Lord, but take it as you give it to us. Let's be obedient. Lord, I ask that you bless each and every person that's joining in on today's message or anyone that listens to it, Lord. Let every child know, Lord, that they are loved, and that they're cared for, and that there's a place for them here. Lord, we just ask that you open up our ears and our eyes to be able to understand the message that we're going to be going over today as well. So Lord, we thank you once again for our protection. We love you. We give you praise. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay, so we're going to start off here with chapter 25, right? Chapter 25, verse 1. I'm going to go through the verses. Some of them I'm going to kind of sum up, and some of them I have some examples that we're going to go over. So we're going to get started here. And I got some notes here that I took, that I have my commentary. So I'm going to be looking a couple different ways. So we go in verse 1. It says Abraham had taken another wife. So Abraham, we learned, remember Sarah had passed away. And so Abraham gets remarried, it says, and her name is Keturah. And her and Abraham ended up having some more sons. They had 6 sons. We have Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua are the sons. Then it talks about their children's children. It talks about Jokshan, father Sheba and Dedan. And Dedan's sons were Ashurim and Leteshim and Luman. I hope I did not butcher those names. I tried my best after studying them for a while. And then it talks about, and Midian's sons were Epher, Hanik, Abida, and Ida. All these were the sons of Keturah, which we know, like we said, Keturah was the lady that he married. Abraham gives everything he owned to Isaac. So we know that in those days, the first son got the inheritance. They got the larger inheritance, was a double portion. And although Isaac was born first, remember, he was born to Abraham and Hagar, which was Sarah's servant that came back with them from Egypt. But God said that wasn't the promise, right? He wasn't the promised son. So he was not considered to be the firstborn. So Abraham actually ended up deeding everything over, leaving everything for Isaac, as he was considered the firstborn. Let me see, make sure I'm not missing anything here with my notes. Yeah, so during these times in this culture, the inheritance was divided amongst the man's sons, with the firstborn son receiving a double portion. And like I said, while Ishmael was born first, he was not considered a firstborn according to law and to God's plan. God did say, however, that he would bless Isaac. Back in chapter 17, verse 19, he said he will confirm his permanent covenant, though, with Isaac and his future offspring. So that's how that ended there. Then we go into Abraham's death immediately. And I know it seems kind of drastic, but that's what we're going to go into, Abraham's death. Abraham lived to be 175 years old. Not as old as some of the other people that we've talked about, like Noah, but 175 years old, that's a long time. And basically, God kept his promise, right? Because he told him that he was going to live a long time, right? He took his last breath. He died at a good old age, and he was content. And that's exactly what, like I said, God had promised him, that he was going to live lifelong. And he was able to see his son, his firstborn, marry, and not just marry someone from Canaanite, but marry one of the ladies back from his hometown, which is what he wanted. So he was happy, his sons Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael, remember, was the first son with him and the servant, and then Isaac was his son with him and his wife Sarah that died. So they both buried him in a cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron. We learn in chapter 23, this was the area where, when his wife died, he felt like he was a foreigner in that land. That's not where he was from. And so he wanted land to bury his wife, to bury Sarah. So when he went into the Heptites, and he asked Ephron, the son of Zohar, if he could buy that land, if they would sell it to him. They told him the amount, but they said, "Oh, don't worry about it. You don't have to buy it. We're not going to worry. You can go ahead and bury your loved ones." But see, Abraham was smart, right? And this is what we want to do. We want to make sure we're wise, because Abraham, it wasn't really necessary for him. So he wanted to make sure that something happens to him, that his family had land. His family that was there had land that they could be buried at together as a family. Like, what if he didn't pay for it? He didn't own it outright. And now he's passed away, he's gone, and his family is there, and they have to shuffle around and try to find out where they can be buried. Or now the people that's in charge there, those Heptites say, no, this isn't yours, or no more. Then what? So Abraham wanted to secure that while he was alive, to make sure that his family would have a place to be buried together. And so this is what ended up happening, where he was ended up being buried at. I'm going to go through. I am reading. I should have told you this earlier. I am reading out a Christian Standard Bible, and like I said, I do have some commentary as well. We're going to go into Ishmael's family records. And in here is basically, I'm going to look up here a minute. My computer is acting a little crazy. We learn about Ishmael and his family. So I missed something here. Let me go back. This is kind of important here. Back in verse 5, it says, Abraham gave everything he owned to Isaac. Then verse 6 says, but Abraham gave gifts to the sons of the concubines, and while he was still alive, he sent them eastward away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. So I looked this up. The concubines, they were like secondary to wives. They didn't have as much of importance as wives. They could have maybe played a role as though they were married, did everything as though they were married, got everything. However, they weren't married. Or they could have been married and maybe, the husband still had a second lady, but it wasn't his wife. So the children of those women, they're saying that Abraham gave them gifts and he sent them away. Now, remember, this is the second time that he sent kids away, because the first time we learned that was Ishmael. Remember, he sent Ishmael away, and that was in chapter 21, verses 8 through 14. He goes in, and this is when basically a couple of different things. Abraham is trying to tell, ask God. He says, hey, I just need you to accept him, because he was going to give everything to him. And God's like, no, you're not. That's not the promised child. I'm still going to bless him, but no, you're not going to leave him everything. But when he told Ishmael and Hagar that they had to leave, once Sarah was pregnant, just she started feeling like, hey, she doesn't need to be here. Like, she's not going to share this inheritance with our son, with my son. And she basically told Abraham, you need to get rid of her, tell her she has to leave. And that's exactly what Abraham ended up having to do, is going to her and say, hey, you have to go. And so he sent Hagar and Ishmael out then. And now we're saying with the other kids that he had with this Keturah, he sent them eastward. So the only one there was Isaac, which was the firstborn, considered to be the firstborn. So I just want to cover that. As we go into, like I said, the sons, Ishmael's family records. Now in verse 12, it tells us there are family records of Abraham's son Ishmael, whom Hagar, the Egyptian Sarah's slave, born to Abraham. So this is the son again of Hagar and Abraham. This is their son, and it just lists all of his kids, right? So these are names of his sons. I'm not going to read all of them. They are 12 of them, but here's what's key, and they list them. It says in here that they list them according to their settlements and encampments. They're 12 leaders. The important thing is, let me get to my notes here. So in here, it talks about these 12 major tribes that were descended from Ishmael. And we remember that in chapter 17, verses 18 through 20, after Abraham, like I was saying, started to convince God, hey, listen, if you could just understand, if you can just love him, and I can leave everything to him. And God is saying, no, he's not the firstborn. You're not going to leave everything to him. He says, I'm going to confirm my covenant with your firstborn, which will be Isaac, to his offspring. But God tells Abraham, he says, he is going to bless Ishmael, right? He says, look, I'm going to bless Ishmael. I will make him fruitful. He will multiply greatly. This is what he says. He will father 12 tribal leaders, and I will make him into a great nation. And look at here. We're in this verse in chapter 25 and in verse 14, it talks about his children. He has 12 children, 12 leaders. And that's pretty much what this is letting us know until we get down to verse 17. Verse 17 says, Ishmael died. He was 137 years old when he died. He took his last breath and he died. And he was gathered. So he was around, his people were around when he died. They came and they settled in Havilah, from Havilah over to Shur, which was opposite of Egypt. And then they said they stayed near all his relatives. So his relatives, remember, his mother was from Egypt. His mother had a wife from Egypt for him. So this is where I apologize. This is where Ishmael ended up by his relatives. And so that was the life of Ishmael. But he did have the 12 sons, and they were prominent. They were leaders. We go in and we're going to talk about this next portion, the next couple of verses. If I can get my mouse going here. It's going to talk about the birth of Jacob. The birth of Jacob and Issael. Right, now here's where it gets kind of interesting here. So starting at verse 19, it says the family records of Isaac. Isaac was this, like we said, the son of Abraham and Sarah. He was 40 years old when they got married. So when the chief servant brought her back to see Isaac, he was 40 years old. And then we know then it tells us that he got married in a tent where Abraham and Sarah, his mother, where they lived at, is where they got married. This is telling us that he was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. She was a daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean, and sister of Laban, the Aramean. And I already told you, the Laban was her brother that went out and told the chief servant to come on in and he could stay the night. And they had a place for some food for him, and then also a place for the camels to stay as well. Now, at this time, Isaac and Rebekah, they didn't have any children. He's 40. Rebecca's a little less than he is, a little younger, but he doesn't have any children. So he's basically pleaded. He goes to God and he prays, right? He's like, he prays on her behalf because she doesn't have children. He's like, hey, can you, bless her with children? The Lord was receptive, right? Says he heard her. He heard this plea from Isaac. And so Rebecca, she's pregnant. Now, this is what it goes and it tells us. It says the children, so it doesn't say child, so we know that it's at least two, right? It says the children inside of her belly struggled with each other. So I can only imagine that, as a woman, as a lady who had kids, you have kids in your belly, you're used to them kind of kicking around, moving around. But this is probably for her, when she said they struggle, she could actually feel the tension, maybe the stress and pulling back and forth, and a lot of movement, more than usual. And it probably sickened her also. And so she's starting to wonder, like, what's happening? What is going on? Why is this happening to me? She's asking herself. And so she finally goes and she decides, I'm going to ask God. I need to ask him, like, what's going on? Right. So it tells us here in verse 23, after she asked the Lord said to her, now listen to this. He goes, I'm going to read from here. I'll try to hold it up. The nations are in your womb. 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples will come from you and be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Now that's kind of telling right there. It says a lot if you break it down. And I'll tell you, the very first time that I read this, I probably read too much into it. Right. And sometimes we do that. God tells us something and we try to make more of it than what it is, to trying to suit what we think it should be. He says, look, there's 2 nations in your womb. There's 2 babies in your womb. If you break it down, it says that 2 people will come from you and be separated. So 2 people are going to come out. They're not going to be conjoined, right? They're not going to be together. They're going to be separated. This is just one of the meanings. 1 people will be stronger than the other. So, of course, for me, I'm thinking automatically, okay, one's going to have more strength. Maybe one got more food while they were in. So he's automatically going to be a lot stronger than the other. and the older will serve the younger. I was a little stumped on this one, at first, like, okay, not sure where that came into play until I read it a couple times and I read the commentary. And we know, like we said, the older, the firstborn, was the one who led everyone else. And the reason that they got the double portion wasn't only because they were the firstborn, but they had some responsibilities. Yeah, they were going to be prominent, they were important, but it was also, now that that dad has gone and has passed away, if there were any unwed sisters, that firstborn was supposed to provide for them. So that's why they had that extra portion. Or if there were widows that did not have children, they were also supposed to provide for the widows, their widow sisters. So that's what the double portion was. So this role was almost like the father figure, because they were supposed to look after the rest of the family also. But in here, God is now saying, hey, look, the older is going to serve the younger. So when you read and you start reading and with that commentary, it's like, okay, so is the younger a little bit more mature? Has God just changed the tradition, what normally happens? And that's what we're going to find out, right? Because the tradition is that the firstborn is the one that gets that prominent role. Everyone knows it, right? It's not a trick. It's nothing that has to be guessed. There are a couple of incidences in the Bible that we're going to read about as we go through the Bible. But for this case, God specifically lets Rebecca know that this is going to happen. It wasn't a surprise. She didn't have to plan for it. So in verse 24, when her time came to give birth, there were indeed twins in her womb. The first one came out red, red looking, covered with hair, probably just a hairy baby. If any of you seen a newborn, some of them come out with a lot of hair, on their arms and their face, head full of hair. And the very first thing most people says, oh, they're going to have long hair. They're going to have a lot of hair. But this is how the first child came out. And here in this version, it says like a fur coat. That's how hairy it was, nice and thick, like a fur coat. And they named him Issael. After that, his brother came out. And his brother came out grasping Issael's heel with his hand. So he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. So a couple key things here. I'm going to go back to my little notes right here, if I can, for a minute. Okay, so like we talked about in traditional standards, what used to take place, right, as far as the firstborn being the one in charge. Even though they were only minutes apart, though, it says that God's plan is still to bless the younger son and continue the line of promise through the younger son was named Jacob. So the younger son, that was who God was promising the line to follow through. And we're going to find out later, maybe why. Why could he have, what did he see before they were even born, right? But so this is what it says in the last line. It says, the older will serve the younger. That is what's meant by that particular verse. When Rebecca, then we go in, Issael, I saw in here, says like hairy, the color red, so hairy. And then Jacob, there's a couple things I saw, heel catcher, but also conniving, deceiving, more or less. His hands on, remember they said he was born and his hand was on the heel of his brother of Issael. And then that kind of rounds out that particular section as far as the them giving birth. One of the main a couple of the main verses in this chapter is Issael. He's selling the birthright. And we know what the birthright, we talked about what that meant, right? We talked about that meaning leadership and being prominent, important, your future's looking good. You were blessed with the double portion. But in this section, we're going to talk about Issael selling his birthright. Wonder why he did that, right? Well, we are going to take a look and see. All right, so let me get back to my notes because my mouse is not really cooperating right now. Okay. We're going to verse 27. It says, when the boys grow up, Issael became an expert hunter, an outdoorsman of such, right? But Jacob was a quiet one. Even though we know his name can have some deceiving, he was a quiet man, kind of a stay at home, right? Kind of maybe a little meek. Uh, but Isaac, so says Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for like the wild game, the fish that he had brought in home. So Isaac loved him. Get this, it says Rebecca loved Jacob. So here we have two parents that each kind of professing their love for their particular child. And I don't know if any of you know this, if this is in your family, you've seen it in other families, or you have a mom and a dad who kind of takes on the liking, favorites. And I know everybody says, oh, we don't have favorites. And I don't know if it's favorites necessarily. It could be that you have more interest with maybe one of your children. And in this case, that's exactly what ended up happening. You just want to be careful of that, though, because sometimes that in itself can divide the children and cause problems down the line also. But it does tell us that. It says Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for the wild game, but Rebecca loved Jacob. Once when Jacob was cooking, now this is going to get into the next section here. Let me just go over when we talked about them growing up. I did want to hit something on here real quick. Okay, verse 29. Once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field exhausted, like he was tired. He's out all day and he's just like, I'm famished. I need to eat. And what is good old Jacob in there doing? Jacob's cooking a stew. Wow. He's like, I'm going to get me a meal going on here. But we know conniving Jacob had something different in store, right? So Jacob says, hey, just 1 minute there, brother. He says, Jacob tells him, he says, let me eat some of that red stuff because I'm exhausted. Or he said to Jacob, this is what Issael says, let me eat some of that red stuff because I'm exhausted. That was another reason they also called Issael Edom, E-D-O-M. It stood for red. And remember, they said that he was red and he was really, really hairy, furry. Jacob, like I said, is like, oh, just 1 minute before he gives him a yes or before he even lets him taste it. He's like, first, sell me your birthright. Man, now, I just want some stew. I got to sell you my birthright. That seemed, I don't know, that seemed like an equal balance there. To me, it didn't. And we know, here's the thing also, we know that in this time, the lentil stew, it tells us that lentils grew well, even in a harsh condition. So they were an important source of nourishment in this arid land. So we know Issael loved the outdoors. He was out there all the time. So this was going to be very nourishing for him. But old deceiving Jacob, yeah, he kind of knew that. Yeah, he wants this stew. It's going to help him when he's out to keep him nice and warm, keep his belly full. But he asked for his birthright. And so this is what Issael says. If you don't know, if you're thinking in your head, I'd be wondering, what would Issael have said? What would you say if someone asks you that? Issael says, oh, you know what? I'm about to die. So what good is a birthright to me? Now, this is key too, he wasn't talking about like right that minute that he was getting ready to die. He was just saying, hey, I'm going to die. It's not going to do me any good. The one thing that I got from that particular verse is the birthright, he was almost thinking selfishly, right? Because he would gain from it, but it was also for your offspring. And it was also for you to take care of the rest of your family. And maybe when we look at this, Issael just wasn't mature enough. And God already, because he saw this, right? Because he already said that the older would serve the younger. It was unimportant to him. He didn't want a leadership role. He wanted to just go ahead and do his own thing, the outdoorsman. And he was so easy to just kind of shuck it off. Like, I mean, this guy could have lived another 50, 60, 70 years, but he's like, yeah, I'm going to die anyway. It's not going to do me any good. And so Jacob says, hey, all right. He's happy. He's like, what? swear to me first. This is what it says in verse 33. He says, swear to me first. So Esau, he swore to Jacob. He sold his birthright. And then Jacob gave him the bread and lentil stew to Esau. Just that easy, just that quick. He just had to swear to him. So Esau, he ate, he drank, he got up, and he went away. And it says in here, it says Esau despised the birthright. I would imagine that maybe throughout his childhood, he knew what that meant. He knew the pressures and the responsibilities. And sometimes it's a lesson for us too, right? Because sometimes from us, we get a responsibility placed on us, and it seems bigger than what it is. And many times it's that blessing. It's a blessing from God. But that's why sometimes we have to go in and we have to ask for wisdom, because we may not know how to handle what we're given. And so it's easier for us. It seems like it's easier for us to just give it away, especially if someone's asking for it. Oh, you can just take it. So it looks like we're doing them a favor, that we're doing a selfless act, but really it's satisfying us because we didn't want it anyway. We didn't know what to do with it. I don't want to be bothered with it. And this was the case with Esau. He just despised. It says he despised his birthright. So we can go on and take from that he just didn't know what to do. He didn't want the responsibility of it. And now it goes in here, says Jacob was scheming to obtain. This is in a commentary. It says Jacob was scheming to obtain what Issael, he didn't even care to have. So this whole time, Issael never wanted it. And Jacob was doing every deceiving act to get it, to satisfy his own personal need. So the older son and the one destined to receive the inheritance and the promises of God. You see how important that is? Like, everything that God is basically giving you a box and saying, this is everything that's going to be yours. And Esau basically tosses it, hits it away like, whatever. I don't care. I don't want any of that stuff. I just want to go out there and fish. I just want to go out there and live outdoors. But apparently he didn't appreciate all that was entailed. Again, we don't know a lot of times what it means when we're blessed with certain things. Some people are blessed, and that's how sometimes you can see people like, man, you are so blessed. And maybe they didn't do anything. That's why I say, like, God already knows our destiny's set by God. We most of the time we mess it up, right? We're the ones who get off track. We come across hot coals, and it's easier for us to try to get off the track, walk all the way around, and guess where we find ourselves? Back on another set of track with hot coals. So we might as well go through it, because those are the things that God says, hey, I need you to go through these things to get stronger. I've already destined you. I already know what the outcome's going to be. And sometimes we just have to go through it. Is it going to be tough? Sometimes, yeah. Is it going to seem daunting? Yes. Are you going to lose sleep? Sometimes, yes. We just have to believe that God has us during that time. He's not going to let us go. And we just have to believe that. Some of us get off the track and we don't even find our way back to the track. We stay off the track because we're like, nope, I ain't going that way. I know what's there. But that's where our blessing's at. That's where God wants, especially if we go to him and ask, right? And that's why I say we want to make sure that when we go to God, and I always say we go to God in expectation. So when we go to him and we ask him, we got to make sure that we're ready for that answer. And if we don't know how to handle the responsibility, we need to go back in and ask, like, help me. What do I do? Guide me, right? This one transaction, it said the fact that, they exchanged the birthright. He gave up his birthright. It says this one transaction that would change lives forever. It was made fully legal and binding by a simple verbal oath. That was it. How many of you had made some agreements with your buddies, and what if that was binding? A lot of times now we can take it away, right? We're like, oh no, I didn't mean that. I didn't really mean that. We take it away, and but here he couldn't. He made that oath, and it was set in stone. So we just want to be careful of that. That actually wraps up chapter 25. I thought it was a pretty good lesson, pretty good chapter. Had some good lessons in here. A couple things I was saying here. Like I said, our destiny, I believe, is already set. We learn patience and trust with Isaac, right? Because Isaac went to God, and he wanted his wife to be child with the child. He wanted her to be pregnant, be able to get pregnant. And he was patient. We didn't see that he went back in. We didn't see where he started to falter and say, hey, God, I thought I came to you. He waited. We know that they got married at 40. They had the child at 60. So somewhere in between it, he waited a number of years, or some at some point of time, he waited after going in and asking God and them getting their child, Isaac. We saw what happened when you can favor a child one to another, because we saw that with both Isaac and then Rebecca. They both favored that child, and we don't know if they're favoring, what else happened to help them get so divided, right? Because they almost didn't care for one another. I mean, how can you care for your brother and he's hungry and you want him to sell something instead of giving him some food for his belly? He's been out all day. This is even though Ishmael did not receive the birthright as a firstborn, he was still blessed abundantly. God kept his promises to Abraham, and he kept his promise to Isaac, right? Remember, we learned that back then. So we saw that manifest here in this particular chapter, the 12 children, and they were 12 prominent leaders. Says the last point that I wanted to make is God had reason for changing the birthright. Maybe he knew, right, Issael didn't want to be a leadership position. Maybe they just needed some more time to mature. Remember, the double portion was to provide to the unwed sisters and the widow that without children. And Isaac or Issael just didn't want to be bothered by it at all. So all of this stuff, we can see that God already knew this well in advance, and we saw how it played out. We sometimes don't know how things are going to happen. You know, we hear things or we see things when we go to God, and we can only see based off our natural eye, right? As far as that goes. Same thing with our hearing. So when we can't see past that, we try to bring it in and fit our mold of what we want it to be. And sometimes we mess it up. A lot of times we mess it up. At least I'll speak for myself. I mess it up sometimes. So we want to just be careful of that as well. But that ends up, like I said, those are a couple points that I got from this particular chapter. It wraps up this chapter. We found out about Issael and Jacob and what actually happened. We learned about the birthright, and we learned that Abraham, he passed away. So now he and his wife Sarah passed away, and they are buried at the same location. So next week you'll go into chapter 26. Miss Carolyn and Mr. Gary will be back on. And for some reason they're not, I'll be here, but chapter 26. So if you want to get ahead, you can go into chapter 26 and read about it. If there was something that you still wasn't sure about in chapter 25, I suggest, go back and look that over. Or you can put something in a comment and say, hey, I read this, or you said this, and I didn't understand it. Feel free about going into the comments. But more importantly, like we said, share the message with someone, one person at least you can share it with. Okay. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. And until next week, just stay safe. Stay safe out there, and just continue to be blessed. If there's nothing else, I will see you next week, me or Miss Carolyn. Goodbye. Thank you again for chiming in today on the Remnant Mentality Ministry Youth Service. Thank you. Goodbye.